Hawaii Women Lawyers present the 2020 Honolulu Prosecutor Debate.
Aloha. Welcome to the 2020 Honolulu Prosecutor Candidates Debate, presented by Hawaii Women Lawyers. Now, Hawaii Women Lawyers is a nonprofit organization to improve the lives and careers of women lawyers and women in general. It works to improve our legal profession and to promote equal opportunities for all of us. My name is Karen Ahn. I am a retired state court judge and former Honolulu Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. I'm honored to serve as your moderator tonight in a debate between the two candidates for Honolulu Prosecuting Attorney, Megan Kao and Stephen Alm. This evening I'll be asking the candidates questions about their plans and their policies. We will talk about issues that impact women and children. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question and then 1 minute to reply. The candidates also will have a chance to directly ask each other a question. And at the end of the questions, each candidate will make closing remarks. We've tossed a coin to select which candidate goes first, but before the first question, a quick note about the COVID precautions we and KITV have been taking to bring you this important discussion while keeping everybody here safe. As you can see, the candidates are amply well separated, and there are plexiglass barriers separating one from the other and them from me. Everyone in the studio is wearing a mask. Now, let's hear from the candidates. Misdemeanor domestic violence is sometimes overlooked as a serious crime, but these cases can be a precursor to more harmful situations. Despite this, and the potential for intervention and treatment, these cases often are continued in court for months. Many are dismissed before getting to trial. COVID has made the backlog worse. Those of these complex cases that go to jury trial are often handled by relatively new deputy prosecuting attorneys. What would your administration do to clear up continuances and dismissals of these important cases? Would you continue to assign them to relatively inexperienced prosecutors?
All domestic violence cases are serious. Misdemeanor domestic violence cases are serious as well. There are thousands of cases that police respond to every year. There are at least a couple thousand that are brought into the system. I did those cases as a deputy prosecutor. I did homicides then. I was the head of the District and Family Court Division, where we trained deputies to do those cases. And then as a judge, my first 2 years was on that calendar. So I know full well, and I would talk to the jurors after every case, and I would say, most cases don't end up in a homicide, but when you look at a domestic violence homicide, virtually everyone has one of these cases before them. So you want to train the deputies up so they are capable of dealing with it. These are often very difficult cases. The family dynamic is difficult. You've got to try to teach them how to handle them the right way. And they should have gone through district court. One of the problems is the deputies quit at the prosecutor's office too soon. They're moved through too fast. And if we can improve morale, improve the training, keep the deputies there, they will have had a year or more in district court learning traffic court, DUI court, and otherwise in order to be ready to go. But you've got to train them in doing jury trials. And when I was head of that division, we had the deputies in their suits on Saturday morning learning how to pick a jury, how to do direct exam, how to do cross-exam, and the like. So these are very important cases. It's often the way to catch somebody right at the beginning. And what people don't realize, if you don't break a bone, somebody can be beaten black and blue and it still stays a misdemeanor. So we will take those cases very seriously if I'm the prosecutor and try to work with Domestic Violence Action Center and other folks to do the best job we can.
Ms. Cowell?
I was a domestic violence victim. For 5 years, I stayed in a very violent relationship, even though I am an extremely strong and educated woman. And so what I would do to bring change to the Honolulu office is I would educate the complainants and the victims We would have the deputies guide the victims through the justice system so they're not confused about what to anticipate and what to expect, so that they understand how trial works, they understand how change of plea works, and they give their input on whether the government should issue a plea agreement or proceed to trial. And if we are to proceed to trial, we will guide the victim through the process. We will practice direct examination and cross-examination with the victim so that the victim is not apprehensive about going to trial and that he or she knows what to expect when cross-examined by a defense attorney. We will also be accessible to the victim. That means we will answer the victim's questions, we will answer the victim's phone calls, we will meet with the victim as much as possible before trial starts. I will bring change to Honolulu by fighting for all victims of Honolulu, including domestic violence misdemeanor victims.
Well, and the number of plea agreements, I think, may well go down because the legislature passed a law this session. The Women's Caucus was pushing hard for it. Domestic Violence Action Center was on board with it. It will make a separate class of cases as a petty misdemeanor based on the law that is likely to avoid a jury trial. And so many cases may be dealt with that way in order to get people assessed and treated. At the same time, working with the victim witness counselors, I think we should do danger assessments on many of the cases so we can identify who's at higher risk. And in danger assessments, the victim, usually herself, but sometimes men as well, she knows best how dangerous her situation is. Is she likely to run into real problems? Is her life at risk? And I was proud when I was heading the Penal Code Review Committee, we made choking into a felony, because choking and stalking are two real red flags in a domestic violence situation.
Thank you. Since 1984, Hawaii Women Lawyers has been involved in assessing conditions and services at women's correctional facility. Do you think that female offenders sometimes can differ from male offenders in terms of circumstances that lead them to offend and their paths to rehabilitation? If so, how would you approach cases involving female offenders, and what would you do to improve services and facilities for these individuals? Ms. Cowell?
We, as the prosecuting attorney, have to be extremely objective. That means that we have to apply the criminal laws to anybody that violates the law, whether man or woman, rich or poor, homeless or not homeless. What the prosecutor can do is be a strong community advocate, lead from the front and inspire people. What I would do to inspire these women is I would go and talk with them. I would explain to them, I understand your history. I understand the abuses that they've gone through. And I would explain to them that they can rise up no matter what the circumstance. The prosecuting attorney has never been a real and true community leader. The past prosecutors we've had have stayed in their lane and acted only as prosecutors. I want to bring real change to Honolulu by acting as a community advocate and inspiring people. I will say the path to rehabilitation is a little different. You know, we have to take into consideration that these women are very often mothers who are leading examples for their children as well. And so we have to guide our women defendants. We have to teach them, you know, this is how we can rise up so that they can teach their children. Another thing that we can do is we can educate the Department of Public Safety, who is in charge and who authorizes the programs within the women's facility. The Department of Public Safety is separate from the prosecutor's office. So what we could do is sit down with the director of Department of Public Safety and give ideas, share ideas, and collaborate with one another. That's what I would do to bring real change to Honolulu.
Mr. Aum?
Yeah, the female offenders are different. Men and women are not the same. And often their motives for committing a crime are going to be different. So we have to use the appropriate gender-based risk and needs assessment in order to determine what the appropriate treatment will be. And we have to look at the fact that substance abuse is rampant in the female defendants, because it's often they're trying to heal themselves and treat themselves, because I think upwards of 90% of the women in prison have a history of trauma, whether it's domestic violence trauma, whether it's sexual assault. And so I've been working with Lauren Walker for years. She teaches solution-focused classes out at the women's prison, and I go routinely to the classes when they have presentations, when they have graduations. I do know some of the women because I had been supervising them before, or sending being their judge. And there is a lot of healing going on at the women's prison. I think that is really the good news. There's a lot of healing going on. But you have to look at trauma. You have to look at substance abuse. You also have to look at, for women to be able to survive, they're worried about their kids. They're worried about their families. So their economic well-being is huge. So when they're getting out on furlough, and thank goodness cooler heads prevailed and Fernhurst Y was kept on as part of the process for furlough. But you have to look at their economic security. Do they have affordable housing? Do they have affordable childcare? Even something like a sick child care center so they can keep working. If they're economically dependent on their husbands or boyfriends and they're abusing them, it puts them at a real disadvantage. Female offenders are different, and we have to treat them as such.
Ms. Cowell, you have a minute.
Yeah, part of treatment, whether it's a man or a woman, is teaching the person a trade. Very often we see defendants who don't have a lot of education, who don't have a trade to rely on. So we will need to encourage the Department of Public Safety to implement programs that teach these women a trade so that they can be independent, they can give back to their community, and they can be productive members of our society, and that they can provide for their children and their family. That's not being done right now in the Department of Public Safety. The treatment facility, or the facilities that we have treatment programs that are antiquated, they're older, and so we need to bring in teaching a trade to all defendants, men and women. We need to bring that change to Honolulu.
Thank you, and we'll be right back. You know, the prosecutor's job is primarily to administer a large public agency. The office now has about 100 deputies and maybe 170 support staff, and of late it's had its share of criticism. Morale, which is a vital part of an office whose duties include public safety, reportedly is not the best. What leadership experience do you have that would enable you to steer this department in the next 4 years? What would you do to raise morale in that office? And what goals would you set for your first 100 days in office? Mr. Alm?
This election, I think, is all about restoring trust to the prosecutor's office. And I have a lot of leadership experience. I have a lot of supervisory experience. I was a felony team captain at the prosecutor's office. I was then asked to head the largest division in the office, the District and Family Court Division, 31 deputies, 25 staff, 5 investigators. It's where deputies learn how to be a prosecutor, how to be a trial attorney. And what I emphasized then and what I'd emphasize with the office is, this has been a tough time for you, but we are going to work together to make this office the best place it can be. A number of faces will be missing, not too many, on the first day, but I will talk to them about creating a culture of ethics and a culture of doing justice and not just winning cases. If you're prepared, you should win most of the cases anyway. But part of it is picking good supervisors. Some will come from the outside if I get in, others will be from the office. You've got to let them do their jobs. We've got to look at every case that has been touched by Kathy Kealoha, if there's still any part of it, or even ones that have been done if we've got complaints about it. But partly it's training the deputies so they feel confident in court, they can make plea agreements from a position of strength, and they're going to win more cases. Part of it is showing the office can be successful. And that means doing things like the Weed and Seed program, where you weed out the crime and you seed the community with positive results. I led that effort in Kalihi Palama, Chinatown, and it reduced crime by 70% there. When the deputies see that the office is getting positive attention for winning more cases and solving community crime problems, that's going to raise morale.
Ms. Cowell?
I want to bring change to Honolulu by leading from the front instead of the top. On the Friday night before the primary election, I ran into a deputy prosecuting attorney walking up Bishop Street. And he said to me, "So how are you doing?" I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "You know, we've been paying attention to this prosecutor's race. We're vested in it." And I said, "Oh yeah, what do you guys say?" And he said to me, "We say, how cool would it be to be walking down the hallways with Megan Cowell, fighting in the trenches with us?" And he said to me, "I just want to be your gopher." And I told this deputy prosecutor, "You are not a gopher. You are an excellent deputy prosecuting attorney." And so I will bring change by leading from the front instead of the top. I trained the misdemeanor division when I was there. I trained the domestic violence misdemeanor division when I was there. And then after I was forced to leave under Keith Kaneshiro, I opened my own practice. And for the past 10 years, I have built an extremely successful, and I've got several employees. I train and supervise them. I train new students, law students, every semester, and I supervise them, and they love what they do. My employees and the students that work with us love what they do, they love to learn, and I will bring change to Honolulu by leading from the front.
Mr. Alm?
Well, trial work is wonderful. I did 26 trials with the prosecutors, 5 murder cases. I presided over 200. But I think I'm going to be so busy administering the office, setting goals, talking to the, training the deputies. It's like Chief Ballard does not put fingerprint powder at a burglary scene and investigate burglary. She's going to be busy meeting with the new Honolulu prosecutor, meeting with the FBI, meeting with the U.S. Attorney. That's what I'll be doing, working with the Attorney General's office, setting up task forces, addressing problems, how to deal with the COVID crisis, how to get jury trials started again. So it's a job that is many-faceted. You've got to get the deputies on board. They're going to feel they're part of something exciting, part of something new. I can provide the steady hand. I've run branches, divisions. I ran the U.S. Attorney's Office, dealt with budgets, dealt with personnel issues. I can hit the ground running. I don't need on-the-job training in how to be a supervisor. I am a proven leader.
You know, jury trials they're complicated animals. They're not easy to do well. What kinds of training programs do you have in mind? And do you think that you may be looking for experienced trial lawyers to come in to be deputy prosecuting attorneys? Ms. Cowell?
When Keith Kaneshiro came into the office in 2010, I, amongst 61 other deputy prosecuting attorneys, were forced to leave that office under that administration. We could not work under that administration. And so there are a number of deputy prosecuting attorneys who have great experience that are willing and ready to go back to that office. They just, and I just, could not work under Keith Kaneshiro. The training programs that I would implement are, we would teach the deputies to do direct examination, cross-examination, opening, closing. We've all done that. But what else I would do is, I would teach them on the procedure of civil law, family court law, because what's happening right now is deputy prosecuting attorneys are functioning in a vacuum. They don't know all the other sections of the Hawaii revised statutes. They don't know what goes on in the other courtrooms. And so I want to teach them just the procedure so that they can better advise our victims, so that we can fight for our victims of Honolulu and guide them through the criminal justice system and educate them and teach them and make sure that when we talk to them, we lessen their anxiety, we lessen their fear, and we can guide our victims through the justice system and bring real change to Honolulu.
Mr. Alm?
I will bring a combination of experienced people. I've had so many former deputies and others tell me, if you get in, I want to come back. And I got calls from the office last summer, with some of the best deputies there, are you going to run? If you run, we will stay, we will help you get that office turned around. So some folks will come in who have experience, other folks will be newer. Any supervisor of a trials division is going to have extensive trial experience. And that is one area I had disagreed with Keith Kaneshiro on there, because if they have extensive trial experience, they've been tested, they know how to handle themselves, they can answer questions for the deputy in the heat of trial. Because if you're in the middle of trial and you run into some really bizarre kind of quirky thing or it goes sideways, you've got to be able to talk to people. And there should be other senior deputy prosecutors who can do that. Chris Van Marter is one who can handle any kind of case coming down the road. He's a supporter of mine. He's head of the white collar division. But we need to have more, and the supervisors have to be able to answer those questions during the heat of the battle. And other folks have volunteered to come back and train, you know, whether it's Loretta Matsunaga or Sheehan, whether it's John Edmonds. There are a host of people that have volunteered to come back and train. So it's exhilarating, it's exciting, it's hard work, but it should be done the right way, and I'm committed to doing that.
If we can talk about specific cases, domestic violence misdemeanor cases, as we noted, can sometimes be assigned to relatively new deputy prosecuting attorneys. And domestic violence, as you've noted, both of you, is not a simple proposition to try to to explain to a jury. What kinds of prosecutors are you willing to put on these misdemeanor domestic violence cases, which unfortunately sometimes are precursors for more harmful situations? Ms. Cowell?
Well, right now in the prosecutor's office, there is an excellent chief of that division. She is hardworking, she's diligent, and she fights for the victims of Honolulu. We also have a captain who's extremely talented. She is aggressive, she's knowledgeable, she's a fighter. She has done civil law and criminal law. And so she understands that when we talk to the victims, we can explain, these are your options, TROs, the criminal case, leaving even. So, you know, we do have experienced deputies there, and these two women lead that division, and they're very good at it. So each division is going to have deputies that are still learning. We're all still learning as lawyers. We never know the answer. We are always learning. And so we will bring some deputies that are learning, but that division is already filled with people that are very experienced and very good at their jobs and fight for the victims of Honolulu. So while we might bring in some new deputies, the training, what we can do is implement better training, teach them how to do jury trials, and teach them how to guide the victims through the system so that he or she is not apprehensive about going through the criminal justice system, so that we can lessen their anxiety, explain to them what to expect so that they're not scared or fearful. And that's how we will bring change to Honolulu.
Mr. Alm?
Well, the deputies who start in that office should be in traffic court, then DUI court, criminal misdemeanors around the island. And then typically that is when they go into a domestic violence jury trial slot. If they are trained well enough, they should be able to handle it. Those are difficult cases, and you have to teach very specific skills, because traditionally, the cases that there's visible injuries, black eyes, are going to end up pleading guilty. But the cases where the victim has recanted and has decided for her own reasons, whether it's safety for herself or her children, she's back with her husband or boyfriend, she may be recanting, which means she's going to say it didn't happen or I hit him first. So there's specific skills about prior inconsistent statements, being able to get those into evidence that have to be taught to the trial attorneys. But when you do it right, and I have supervised that division before, you do enough training and you do the right training, you can get the deputies skilled up to handle those. And as I said earlier, there is a new law in effect. It's going to start in January, and that's going to make a petty misdemeanor out of most of those cases, or many of the cases. And those are either going to go to trial in front of a judge instead of a jury, or they'll end up pleading. They get a chance to keep their records clean, but it's getting them into the system. I think there's frustration that what's going on there now is not working. Cases are getting dismissed and thrown out, and that has got to change. But I'm convinced with the right leadership and with the right training, we can make that effort work. We can get more convictions, get that higher up than what it has been recently, and protect the victims in this state.
And we'll be right back with a question about child sex trafficking. Child sex trafficking is a serious and pervasive problem in Honolulu. It involves girls, boys, transgender youth. Some are runaways, some are victims of child abuse or neglect, as well as drug addiction. Now, the children are often recruited by pimps or their subordinates, even other youth, online or in person. Some recruitment occurs near gaming rooms or homeless camps. Some occurs while these children are staying at youth shelters and residential programs. Many child victims of sex trafficking run away from residential treatment facilities. They disappear for months. If you are elected as prosecuting attorney, how do you plan to approach the issue of child sex trafficking, including recruitment occurring at youth shelters and residential programs, and victims who may run away from residential treatment facilities? How do you plan to approach the ongoing demand for prostituted children, which is what drives this industry to begin with? Ms. Cowell?
So in my practice, my private practice that I have now, I have been able to help many families with many, very often female underage children who are runaways, who have been recruited by pimps, who are hanging out at strip bars when they're only 14 years old. And I've been able to talk with these children. I've been able to educate them about where their lives are headed. I've been able to talk to them about the criminal justice system and explain to them in layman's terms, not as a lawyer, but as one local girl to another, to explain to her where she's headed. And you know, sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't. That's the reality of it. All we can do is act as community leaders and inspire these young girls and sometimes boys to get onto the right path. We cannot force them. We cannot make them do anything. All we can do is act as true community leaders, act as mentors for them, guide them and educate them and their families, because very often these issues stem from either mental health disorders or drug abuse. And I'll tell you, many families, they just don't understand the treatment for mental health disorders. Very often parents excuse their children's actions because they rely on drug addiction, but very often it's mental health disorders that need to be treated and need to be diagnosed by psychiatrists so that we can get treatment from the child that is suffering from a mental health disorder. So in order to bring real change to Honolulu, we have to educate our keiki and our family on drug addiction and mental health disorders and treatment.
Mr. Alm?
This is a crisis. when I was the United States Attorney, we prosecuted 7 pimps for human trafficking. The women who would be beaten by these pimps, they'd approach law enforcement because even if they had been arrested before by a Honolulu Police Department officer, they often thought they treated them fairly. And they told them, the U.S. Attorney's Office will do these cases. And so the pimps got arrested, they got held in custody, they got convicted, and they got sent to prison for an average of 6 years. That gave the victim a chance to get out and get away, go back to their old life before they were recruited in there. So I'm familiar with this, I take it very seriously, but I've made it a real point to get educated in the last year. I have met Jessica Munoz, a dynamo of a nurse, who started a program called Ho'ola Napua, and they are dedicated to helping young girls escape this life. They're raising $9 million to build a center, the Pearl Haven, so the girls, young women, can go to a place that is safe, they can get treated, they can get counseling, they can get GEDs, because if a girl has been raped for the last 4 years, multiple times a day, going to a foster system is not enough. I was also very happy to meet Shah Talebi. He was had been a prosecutor in Washington State. He successfully learned how to do these sex trafficking cases that are complicated to do, difficult to do, but they are doable. Where there's a will, there's a way. He was recently hired by the State Attorney General's office as the statewide coordinator for child trafficking. So I look forward to making the Honolulu prosecutors a visible group that will prosecute these offenders and send them to prison to make Honolulu an inhospitable place for them to practice this.
Ms. Cowell?
You know, what makes domestic violence cases and sex trafficking cases difficult is the dynamic and the relationship between the victim and the suspect or the defendant. Because very often she's female. At some points in time, she believes that she's madly in love with her attacker. And other points in times, she's deathly afraid of him. So we have to understand that dynamic and be able to educate the victim so that she's not scared, so that she can anticipate what's going to happen. We need to have training on that. We will have our deputies get the training and explain how these victims feel when they go through the justice system. Very often, they're transient, they're moving house to house, they've moved 12 times in a year, and then all of a sudden, they're subpoenaed to come testify against their attacker. And so they're scared, they're nervous, they're full of anxiety, and so if we can lessen that anxiety for them, guide them, we can be able to fight for them and help them fight for themselves.
With the sex trafficking is that the public is really not aware of this. As somebody said, they don't think it has anything to do with them until it's somebody in their family, their daughter, sister, niece, and then it's the biggest tragedy to hit their family. One of the trainings was down at one of the hotels with all the security, because with Hawaii having a huge tourist economy, that's where much of the sex trafficking takes place. A teacher at a public school wrote to me and said she was really happy to work with me on Weed and Seed, but also there's trafficking going on in her school. The boys invite the girls to a party on Saturday night. And then this older guy is there and he pays her a lot of attention. Runaways are at the highest risk. Families often, research by the Hawaii Commission on the Status of Women and Arizona State University showed families are often the ones that get their kids started in this or get their brother and sister started. So we got to raise awareness and treat this seriously and send those traffickers to prison.
We'll be right back. The candidates now are going to ask each other a question. Mr. Alm will go first. Ms. Cowell will then have up to 2 minutes to respond. Mr. Alm will have 1 minute to reply, and then Ms. Cowell will have 30 seconds to rebut. We will then do the same thing with Ms. Cowell's question to Mr. Alm. Mr. Alm?
All right, on July 23rd of 2020, in a Civil Beat interview, I'll quote from it. Megan Cow, a prominent criminal defense attorney, believes in the current criminal justice system and is pitching a strict by-the-book approach. Cow says a prosecutor lobbying for policy changes is tantamount to corruption. Given the fact that Peter Carlisle lobbied extensively to get a new information charging law so it could be an alternative to grand jury or preliminary hearing, does that mean Peter Carlisle was corrupt?
Absolutely not. And nobody believes that Peter Carlisle was corrupt. He was the prosecuting attorney for 14 years, and everybody loved Peter Carlisle as the prosecuting attorney. He was law and order, he was fair, and he was objective. What I said is, we cannot use our position in order to further a personal interest or a personal agenda. We are the experts on criminal law, and so we can educate the legislature on criminal law. Information charging is within the criminal law realm. However, I, as a prosecuting attorney, would never, ever go and lobby with a special interest group or a union to further their personal interest. That would be an abuse of power. I cannot use my position or my authority or my popularity as an elected official to further anyone's personal interest other than the community. The prosecutor's duty is to protect our community by objectively applying the criminal laws to anybody that violates the law, whether homeless or not homeless, rich or poor, local or not local. We have to be objective and we have to be fair so that we don't end up in a corrupt state like the current prosecutor's office is. And what happens is when you go and use your authority to further personal interest or to further the interest of a special interest group or a union, you do come corrupt. And I am here to end corruption.
Mr. Alm?
Well, with all due respect, Ms. Cow, that's not what it says. You said clearly and simply, a prosecutor lobbying for policy changes is tantamount to corruption. And I see that as part of the job. As the Honolulu prosecutor, you're working with the Maui prosecutor, Hawaii Island prosecutor, and Kauai prosecutor, and the state attorney general. You have a law enforcement coalition that comes up with a package of bills every year. You're trying to help victims. You're trying to make the system work better. And so you're going to the legislature. You're going to the city council. I did that as when I was at the prosecutors before. I did that as the United States Attorney when I chaired the Penal Code Review Committee. They are going to want to ask you questions. They're interested in learning about your positions on things, asking you questions about how the system works. And they're going to want to know from a policy standpoint what works, what doesn't work, what can we do to reduce crime.
Ms. Cowell?
The prosecutor is the expert in criminal law. We are the expert in criminal process and criminal substantive law. So we need to educate the legislature and the public and our victims on the criminal law. But we cannot use our position to further any personal interest of any special interest groups, nonprofit organizations, or unions. I am here to end corruption, and I promise never to do that. A prosecutor's duty is to objectively apply the criminal laws to anyone that violates the law.
Ms. Cowell, your question to Mr. Alm.
Steve Alm, you were under Keith Kaneshiro and worked alongside him for 9 years, and you have a rapport with him. Was he dishonest then? How did we end up here? Did he become corrupt after being in politics for 35 years? What happened?
That's a very good question. I was hired by Charles Mars and Paul Toyozaki, actually, for several years, and then Keith Kaneshiro came in. I was a felony team captain. He then saw that I had leadership abilities. He asked me to be head of district and family court. I didn't see anything untoward during the years I was there. I left after 9.5 years to become the United States Attorney. So I didn't see anything like that. I did have a disagreement with him as far as making a supervisor of a large trials division somebody who doesn't have a lot of trial experience, because they're not able to answer deputies' questions. They don't know what deputies go through doing back-to-back trials. And so we had disagreements. I tended to be vocal about those disagreements, and I think that probably hurt my relationship with him, but he saw that I did, I think, an excellent job as head of district and family court. It's the entry level for the office. It's where the deputies learn how to be ethical. And so I talked to them about Berger versus United States, a great Supreme Court case that talks about the role of a prosecuting attorney. And it's to seek justice, not to win cases. It's to strike hard blows, but not foul ones. He loved the training I did. I had the deputies in their suits on Saturday morning in district court after being in court all week so they could learn direct exam, cross-exam, how to pick a jury, opening statements, closing arguments. Mitch Roth stopped me at the legislature about a year ago and he said, "Steve, that training on Saturday was wonderful. We learned the rules of evidence. You taught us how to do this, you and the other supervisors." And he said, "Now I'm the prosecutor, they're judges, we learn the rules of evidence. You don't learn this stuff in law school, and you're not going to just pick it up from reading a book. You have to have in-court training to learn it." So he was very happy with the job I did. I didn't see these problems. I think you've got to pick the right supervisors with moral centers and let them do their jobs.
Ms. Call?
So I hear you talk a lot about your own experience. The question really was going to Keith Kaneshiro, and what I've seen is, after being in politics for 35 years, he had many compromised relationships. And I see that that's what happens when someone is in politics for 30 plus years. It doesn't seem, based on your answer, that Keith Kaneshiro was involved in corruption back when you were there 25 years ago. But when Keith Kaneshiro came back into the prosecutor's office in 2010, he already brought his own compromised relationships. He was beholden to many people, he owed many people things, he trusted the wrong people, and that's why we are here today. Honolulu needs a fresh new start, and we need to end the corruption.
My brother always told me when somebody has a job for more than 10 years, especially in government, they start seeing it as their job. And I think that's why I believe in term limits for the prosecutor, because if you can't do it in 8 years, you're not going to be able to get the job done. And corruption and cleaning up that office is job one. I made that a priority when I was the United States Attorney. We prosecuted Danny Quijano, we prosecuted Gary Rodriguez, head of the United Public Workers, Milton Holt, and Andy Marigatani. So cleaning up that office, restoring trust there is job one.
And we'll be right back. You know, one of a victim's rights is the right to restitution when a judge orders a convicted offender to reimburse the victim for medical expenses or damaged property in an amount the offender can afford. Some offenders may refuse to pay, which means victims have no way to collect the losses unless they file a civil lawsuit. Probation officers can vary in how much they emphasize restitution among their probationers. Refusal to pay also sometimes can be another form of an offender's power and control over a victim. Is restitution an important part of law enforcement, and why? What steps would you take to assist victims in collecting court-ordered restitution when offenders fail to pay? Ms. Cowell?
Yes, restitution is a necessity of our criminal justice system. And actually what's happening now is we are making it a freestanding order, and therefore the Attorney General is able to file a complaint based on that freestanding order to collect the amount in an assumpsit case against the defendant. So it's a breach of contract case for money owed. And so what happens is the Attorney General files the complaint for the money owed, and then they can garnish the defendant's wages if he or she is working, so that we can provide the victim with the restitution that he or she deserves.
Mr. Ahl?
Restitution is vitally important because often it's the only thing that tries to make the victim whole, or at least as close to it as you can get. I was privileged to ask to be the judiciary representative on the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, along with Senate President and the Director of the Department of Public Safety. And the very best thing we did in that whole effort was change the way restitution is collected from inmates. It used to be 10% of what they earned in prison, where the wages are terribly low. Instead, it then became 25% of what there is in their inmate account. And it also created positions within the Department of Public Safety to help collect this money. It was landmark legislation. It was the model that the whole country looked to Hawaii for, because it helped victims to get that. And they have received more than $4 million since that legislation passed. So there were 15 victim witness positions to do that. And victims really are the heroes often. They're willing to testify, and when they're willing to testify, it makes the whole system work, and they help all of us when they're willing to do that. So it's very important. Part of the job as prosecutor, make sure the deputy prosecutors understand they should be asking for restitution in every case and making sure the defendants are held accountable.
The candidates now will make their closing remarks. We'll start with Ms. Cowell.
I never would have thought that I could see my name on a ballot in a public election. At 15 years old, I was homeless, and to survive, I worked in many bars. And then I was a domestic violence victim, and when I left that relationship, I was homeless for the second time in my life. I was lost, and I was devastated. Yet, Peter Carlisle encouraged me to run for prosecuting attorney and has endorsed me, and I am extremely honored to be here. This race is the most important race on the ballot this year because it will affect the next 4 to 8 years of our community's safety. And that office cannot be fixed in just 4 years. I am here for the long term, and I'm running to end corruption and to bring real change to Honolulu. Crime is on the rise. I will bring law and order to our community so that defendants know that Honolulu is no longer putting up with this. I will charge all levels of crime, low, mid, and high, including the property crimes that so many of our community suffers from. If you want to end the corruption and you want real change for Honolulu, vote Megan Cowell for prosecutor.
Mr. Alm?
This election is all about restoring trust to the prosecutor's office. I was gratified in the primary election. I was successful in all the districts across the island, from Waianae to Hawaii Kai, from Pearl City to Kaneohe. The voters recognized, given the crisis, given that office's current situation, you need a proven leader. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I went to University Lab School. I worked at Dole Cannery for 4 summers. I boxed for Kalihi Youth Boxing Club out of Kalakaua Gym. Fittingly, my first trip to Oahu prison was for a fight. My second fight was with Mark Ibanez out in Waianae. I went to UH for 2 years. I went to Oregon for 2 years. I met my wife Haunani there. We just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. We have one great son, Chris. I am a proven leader at the prosecutor's office, as United States Attorney, and as a judge, and I really am the innovative candidate. At every stage, I've looked for new ideas, new way to do things, never satisfied with the status quo. I was the toughest sentencing judge on the calendar. I will be tough with the defendants who need it. Some people have to go to prison to protect the rest of us. The violent, the dangerous, the ones who won't stop stealing should go to prison at sentencing. But other people with drug and alcohol problems, mental health problems, often younger, they can and should be placed on probation. And we can use proven strategies like drug court, like mental health court, like Hope Probation to help people succeed. You don't have to send them all to prison. You should send the ones that need to, and then use these other strategies for the rest. So I learned you never do anything by yourself. It always takes working with others. I plan to make the prosecutors a full partner with every other law enforcement agency in the judiciary. We're going to make that office the best it has ever been. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our candidates for being with us tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening for this important discussion. We hope that you found this session to be informative. We urge everyone to vote and vote early. Mail-in ballots apparently are already arriving. They must be received by November 3rd. Now, you can watch a prior debate hosted by Hawaii women lawyers for prosecutor candidates held before the primary election. It focused on domestic violence, sex trafficking, victims' rights, and racial disparity. None of those questions was repeated here tonight. The video is online at www.hawaiiwomenlawyers.org under the tab marked Events. We'd also like to thank KITV for providing us with this opportunity. Good night.